All right, I think we have everybody, so we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. All right, I will kick us off. Hello, everybody. When I say everybody, there's two people. So my name is Rachel Gumbiade. I'm a housing development project manager. Thank you all for joining. If you don't mind, just putting your name in the chat, and if you're a resident, that way we just have to kind of just track who we are. Who are attending these meetings, because a lot of the times HUD requests that information from us. So if you don't mind doing that in the chat, that would be great. And then we'll, throughout this presentation, please feel free to ask questions. You can put them in the chat. And you can also unmute and ask the question, but either way is fine. And we will get started. Next slide. All right, so this is just our meeting agenda. We plan to discuss just a recap of what we talked about in the previous meetings, what our update is today, and then our next steps. On with me is Laura McCann from our relocation team. She is the director of all things resident services and relocation, and she's amazing. So she's going to be talking through all of that. And then we will kind of just go through any questions, additional lingering questions at the end. All right, so as a recap from the previous meetings, we talked about the various options that we had for Stonecrest. As we stated previously, the funding that we get for Stonecrest right now is public housing funding. And that money is being depleted, is not being replenished, which is making it really challenging for us to be able to do the major, capital needs for the property. So that's like roof repair, siding, any of the major like unit repairs. It is making it very challenging for us to do those things, so that we can continue to have you all live, the way you want to in these units. But so we talked about option one, and that is just continuing as is. And then the other two options incorporated this RAD conversion, and that is where the Section 8 funding comes into play. So that bucket of money is always being replenished. We would be able to utilize that money to move forward with any other major repairs and either redevelopment and go through all of that. What we decided on after these meetings was going with option three, which option three is to replace all of the units at other sites with brand new apartment units. And this would be a transfer of assistance. And so, and the reason this option is the most ideal is because we would be able to, timeline wise, be able to have our residents have these modern brand new units. And I think in a more reasonable timeline, as well as I think with the funding and the way that this would work out, extensive rehabilitation is just not something that is very feasible for this property, and it would still incorporate relocation offsite. So option three, I think, is the best. And yeah, next slide. So we have received our HUD CHAP approval. So kind of going back, and we'll go through the timeline in a later slide. When we had the previous meetings, we had talked about how we would be submitting an application to HUD. And we did do that. We submitted that application, and HUD came back and said, yep, you're approved. Here is your CHAP. And a CHAP is an acronym for Commitment to Enter into Housing Assistance Payment Contract. It's very long, so we don't always say that. We say CHAP. And this basically means that HUD is saying, all right, Raleigh Housing Authority, you now have the ability to create a plan for Stonecrest. Before, we had talked about how we have no definitive plans. We can throw out all of our options, but we don't have any plans as it stands right now. And so now HUD has given us that approval so that we can start creating a plan. And this plan, so we can move forward with our financing plan. We will have a concept call with HUD, and then our site design and engaging any third-party vendors that we need to engage to start figuring out what needs to be done. This does not mean that construction is starting. We still have quite a few steps to get there. And I think that the most important thing you need to know is that we will be engaging with you and getting your feedback, and there will be people reviewing the site, and it will be a lot of what we call pre-development work to be able to get to the point where we have something in place that's a good plan. So yeah, so that's what the HUD CHAP approval is. Next, yeah. All right, so like I said, there's no definitive plan for the future of Stonecrest right now. We do know that there are two replacement housing options. So the first is to build new units off-site on RHA owned land. So RHA owns various parcels throughout Raleigh, and we could build a property on one of those parcels, and that would be new, modern units. The other option is to buy a newer property. So we could acquire a new property, and those would be obviously similar brand new units, or almost brand new units, and that would be an option as well. So, but either way, we have not identified any, a land parcel. We have not identified any property that we would want to acquire at this time. But those are typically the options that we have for replacement housing. We do intend to replace all 42 units here. So that is part of our commitment. And then in addition, part of our goal here is to actually create more affordable housing. So we would not be able to determine how many additional units at Stonecrest we could build. That's kind of part of this whole process, but we're reviewing everything. But Raleigh Housing Authority is committed to expanding affordable housing. So we want more units, not just 42. So I think that'll be really helpful. And then going back to the replacement housing options. So what HUD does require is that we find something that is comparable to the unit or the location and amenities that you have right now. So if your property is near certain, grocery stores, or it's near a bus stop, or anything that is an amenity to where you live, then it has to be similar to that. We aren't going to find a property or build in some location that is not going to be accessible, if that's what you're already used to. And so that is kind of all of what we are doing right now when we say we're creating a plan. Those are the things we're reviewing to make sure we're meeting that criteria. Okay, thanks. All right, here's the timeline I was referencing. So as you can see in that little, red marker, we are still early in the process. We've made baby steps. So we had 2 resident meetings at the beginning, and we submitted our application. We have our chat now, and now we're having these 2 resident meetings. We still have several steps to get to our closing and the construction start. In that time frame, we anticipate making sure that we are having as many resident meetings as possible. HUD has a minimum requirement, and we are exceeding that. But we want to make sure we're engaging with you all, we're getting your feedback, we're keeping you informed, and all of that good stuff. Another note, so required relocation would not begin prior to, late 2027, early 2028. So you have a ton of time. I don't want people to look at this timeline and start to panic, like they need to, we need to relocate now. You have time. I'm not, we don't want you to think that you have to start doing that now. I think, this timeline, we're still working through all of the, little things here and there. So we want to make sure people know that relocation, that required relocation, would not begin until earliest would be late 2027. And Laura's going to talk a little bit more about all of that and what that entails. But I think that it's really just important to note that it's not till later. Um, and then I think next slide. And this is for Laura.
Hi, so I do apologize. My camera is not working tonight, but hopefully you can still hear me. My name is Laura McCann. I am the Director of Resident Services, and I am going to talk about what I may be a little biased, but what I think is the most important part, and that's the people. And that's, one of the reasons the Housing Authority is doing what we're doing is because we care for the people and we want to expand affordable housing for everyone. We have very extensive waiting lists, so it is very important that we have added to our portfolio, that we have more houses available, and that we can keep people housed that need affordable housing. Because Raleigh is continuing to be pricing out our residents. But one of the things I'm going to start with tonight is talking about your resident rights. It is very important that you know your rights. Please make sure you ask questions if you have any about them, but it is always in your best interest to know what your rights are. So the first right I'm going to speak about is that you have the right to ample notice of any renovations or redevelopment. That's one of the things we're doing here tonight is we are trying to contact you well ahead of time and giving you plenty of time to digest the information, ask questions, learn more. We really are hoping to over communicate with you and give you all of the opportunities to participate if you want to, rather than under communicating, in which you could potentially feel like you weren't given that chance. So we would rather get on your nerves and say, oh my gosh, that housing authority again is emailing me or calling me or putting up flyers, than to feel like you weren't given that opportunity. So we're going to continue to over communicate with ample notice about renovations and redevelopment. You have the right to give us your comments and feedback. This is very important. Like Miss Rachel said, we are making a plan to make plans, but it's really good information for us to know what you are looking for in a redevelopment. One of the residents at the meeting this morning was very interested in ceiling fans and overhead lighting at the new property. That was very important to her. So, giving us feedback like that helps us take all of the good tidbits of information that you have from a resident perspective and lets us put it together in that plan so that when we're creating new housing, it's really robust and it's looking at all of the things that you as a resident would like to see. So you can give us, your comments and feedback at meetings like we're having today. You can email us, come by the office and see us. We'll take those comments and feedback anyway, but you'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. Now, choice mobility, that is a little bit different than what you're used to right now at public housing. So with public housing, how that operates is right now you have an address at Stonecrest. And as long as you're at that address, your rent is affordable there for your family. However, if you were to say relocate during this process and you get a tenant-based voucher, what you could do is you could come back to the Housing Authority 12 months after you sign your new lease. So that's when your 12-month period starts. You would sign that new lease and you would come back and say, hey, Housing Authority, I would really like to take my assistance and go elsewhere. You don't have that option under public housing, but you could under Section 8 if you wanted it. Again, totally optional. And that would allow you to leave RHA's portfolio. You could go anywhere in the county. You could go anywhere in the state. You could go into any state as long as you have a landlord that would accept that voucher. Essentially, what you would do is you would just find that landlord, and the housing authority would then help continue to make your rent stay affordable. So we have some people who are very interested in that option and some who are happy to stay in our area. But that would be a very individualized question that you would come and talk to us about. Everybody has the choice on whether they would like to consider that. We're happy to have you stay with us in our housing as long as you continue to qualify for the program. But that would be kind of a cool new option that is not available to you in public housing. And everything we're talking about tonight, you still have the resident right to have your income based rents, right? So we follow, whether it's public housing or Section 8, we follow HUD formulas. So if your rent goes up, that means congratulations, you had an increase in your income. If you've lost some income, that means your rent goes down, right? So we're still going to be following that formula. It should still be affordable for your household. Any of the options we're talking about tonight, I want you to feel comfortable and confident that it will still be income-based rents, okay? That I know that's one of the reasons you're here with us at Raleigh Housing Authority is because we follow those HUD formulas and that will not change regardless of any renovations, redevelopments, okay? Next slide. So when residents are relocated, RHA is going to assist with that process. And we can assist in a few different ways, and I'll talk about that, I believe, on the next slide. But we are here to help and make this process hopefully as easy as possible. Moving is never pain-free, but hopefully it is as easy as it can be. You have the right to return after a temporary relocation. So if you wanted to come back to Stonecrest in the future after it has been rebuilt and there are new properties there, if you're in good standing, we'd be happy to have you come back. That would be an option. Again, all of these things are options. You wouldn't have to. Stonecrest might be where you're most comfortable and you want to come home and return there when we have a new property. You may be happy to leave Stonecrest. You know, there's no wrong answer there, but that would be something that you could choose to do. And I did say when you're in good standing. And what I mean when I say that is that you're complying with your lease agreement. You're still paying your rent. You're still doing all of those things, right? That's what I'm talking about. There wouldn't be any lease compliance issues. Just to make sure that that's clear what I mean when I say good standing. You would have the right to a resident organization. That's a resident council. So we hold resident council elections every other year. Whether we're continuing in public housing or we're switching to Section 8, we still will be expecting to have resident councils be an option for all of our communities, and we will still fund that through HUD's tenant participation funds. You have the right to address grievances, disputes, and actions of RHA. What I mean when I say that is, did we do something? Did we not do something that you thought should have been done a certain way? You have the right to come talk to us about that. We'll sit down with you. We'll take a look at whatever the question is or whatever the dispute is, see where maybe the disagreement is, what happened, what transpired, what should have happened, and we'll take a look at that with you and just talk through the process and see if there are any actions that need to occur. If you bring us an issue, we'd be happy to look at that with you. Next slide. All right, so the relocation team, we have a dedicated relocation team. They are in resident services department. We have a relocation manager and relocation specialist, and it is their sole job at the Raleigh Housing Authority to help residents going through this process. They have successfully worked with Heritage Park families. They have moved on to some of our other communities, and they are doing a fantastic job. They help in a few different ways, right? So one way is that they help with the dollar signs of moving costs, right? So the Raleigh Housing Authority can help issue relocation funds and relocation payments. That could look a few different ways. That could look like you saying, I'm in a 3-bedroom household. I would like you to issue me the generic 3-bedroom fund amount, and we can cut you a check for that amount. It could look like you saying, hey, Housing Authority, I spent $2,000 on my move. Here are all my receipts. I want you to reimburse me for every penny that I spent. We could do it that way too. Again, that is a family by family decision on how you would like to receive those funds. I will say that the flat fee per bedroom does tend to be the more popular option just because you don't have to keep up with receipts. And that can turn some people off into doing that. It is more paperwork on the resident's part. So that is something to consider. Another thing that the relocation team does is we help with things that don't necessarily have dollar signs behind them, right? So we may help you have lists and connections with landlords who we know are leasing. We have been very fortunate in our partnerships to have a lot of brand new properties coming online in our area while we're doing this. So we have had somewhere between 35 to 40% of people who have gone through this process have been leased up at brand new properties. They were the first tenants to ever sign a lease agreement for those units. So they have very nice amenities, things that, just weren't around at the time Stonecrest was originally built. Washing machines, dishwashers, microwaves, things that are common now that aren't in Stonecrest due to its age. So we can help you make connections with that. We have connections with movers and moving companies if that's something that you need. We've made connections with the Wake County Public School System if you need to have any kind of consideration for children in school. Do you need to move during summer break when your child is not having their school semester impacted by a move? All of those things, we don't have a dollar sign behind them, but we do understand that they're very important to you all and they impact your life. So we're going to be here to help you with that. If you maybe have accessibility needs. So we're working at one of our senior disabled buildings right now, and there are a lot of considerations for people needing flat units, units that have wheelchair capabilities, things of that nature. We'll work with you to make sure that we can't tell you where to lease, but we can help you work through the process of looking at options so you can make an informed decision as to what household would be best for what location would be best for your household, whether it's on a bus line, if you have medical appointments, all of those things, the intricacies. We're going to have relocation staff come talk to you, work with you one-on-one, and see what game plan is best for your family. We are working, like I said, at multiple communities right now, so we are not in Stonecrest, although sometime in the future we may be. Right now, we're working out of other sites, so we do have a couple of phone numbers on the screen. If you would like to talk to our relocation team right now, again, we're not starting the relocation process, but you can always call us and ask us questions or set up appointments. We'd be happy to meet with you and talk over anything ahead of time. But you're not going to see us on site until probably later in the process when we get closer to a relocation actually taking place, which again, at this point, we're thinking will be late 2027. Slide. So when we relocate, there are a few different options. We have done a voluntary relocation and mandatory relocation process at the previous redevelopment sites. Voluntary option would be before, will be the start of the process. We would say, is there anybody who wants to move now? If so, we'll let you go and we'll still honor all of your rights to return if you want to, but you don't have to. And so you would have the option of saying, yeah, I would like to go now, or, I'd like to stay here until we get to the mandatory process. That's fine. Either way is fine. But at some point, we will get to a mandatory relocation process. And when we get to the mandatory process, what that will look like is the housing authority will give you at least 90 days. It may be longer than that, but the required minimum is 90 days. Advance notice. So it's 3 months where we would say, okay, we need you to, move from this unit by X date. And here are some potential relocation options. Please let us know what you think, and we would start that process there. I will say we may have to move you before starting a voluntary or mandatory relocation process only if there's a serious health or safety concern, okay? So it is one of the things that the Housing Authority promises to you as residents and to HUD that we're going to keep you in safe, sanitary, decent housing. So if something changes, if we have a hurricane and a tree falls on your roof and now you've got a major structural leak, if there's a sewage line that has something happen to it, If those things occur and now we're in a not safe place, we will have to move you ahead of that schedule, but that would be on a case by case basis, right? So that may only impact a family or two at a time if that were to happen, and it may not happen. But I just want to reiterate that we need you to be in safe and sanitary housing. So that would be the only time we would expect to move you ahead of schedule, okay? Unless you've done something like requested a transfer ahead of time, and that's completely separate from relocation, right? So current relocation options, that could be other RHA owned and managed housing. Stonecrest may be the first community you've lived in at RHA, or it may not be. We do have other communities in our portfolio. We can look at moving you to one of the other properties that we have. In that case, RHA would continue to be your landlord. We would continue to operate the maintenance. All of that stuff would be very similar to how you are with Stonecrest, because it would still be under our main umbrella. You could also go out with the voucher program. When we say Section 8 voucher program, those are the same things that you may hear them called differently, but they are the same programs. We have different types of vouchers. And in that case, if you were to go out with the voucher program, RHA would not necessarily be your landlord anymore, although we would keep your rent affordable. You may have another apartment complex or a private landlord that is taking care of the maintenance of your structure and not RHA staff. Again, we will talk with you when we get to time to see if you have a preference about how those programs operate, but those are what we are seeing most commonly with our previously relocated families. Next slide. So here we have a program comparison chart. It may be a little small on your screen, but we do have these also on our website if you want to look it up later. So going from top to bottom, we have 4 different programs, just as an example of what you could relocate in. And then going from left to right, we have some of the different considerations. So you may want to look at this and say, this issue is really important to me. I really want to make sure my security deposit amount does not change. So I'm going to want to stick with RHA as my landlord as long as I can. Because as long as RHA is your landlord, we're not going to charge you a security deposit. We've already done that once, right? However, if you go out on the market, you would have a landlord setting a separate security deposit. You may be interested in seeing if you can, at some point, move to a community that has a CIS program that does after-school programming at some of our sites. You may be interested in seeing what the bedroom size differences are. Maybe that's important to your household. This chart's just to help get some considerations flowing through your mind. You don't have to answer anything tonight or for a while, but we do want you to think about those considerations. Each program is slightly different. And again, we do have handouts of these flyers we can get you if it's a little hard to see on the screen, or you can look it up on our website as well. Next slide. So ways to get ready. We are very early in the process, but there are still some actions you can take now to help make this process easier when we get going. One way is to make sure you are continuing to pay your rent on time, curing any lease violations. Everything we've talked about tonight is assuming that you're in good standing with your lease. If you're not in good standing with your lease, you need to talk with your property manager, Miss Melissa, about that. That is a completely separate topic from anything renovation, redevelopment, okay? So make sure you're continuing to do what you need to for your lease and paying your rent. We will have ready to rent classes that you can participate in the future. Those will be a great opportunity to work with one of RHA's partners, Triangle Family Services, to talk about getting prepared for a move, how to be a good renter, considerations when looking for landlords and credit scores, all of those things. That'll be a 5 or 6 week course where it'll be 1 hour for I think they're Wednesdays at one property and Fridays at another property, but let's say we pick Fridays for Stonecrest, then you would go, for 1 hour for 5 Fridays in a row, something like that. Make sure you have your personal identification documents ready. You don't need to give them to the housing authority yet, but do you know where your birth certificate is, your social security card? We will at some point need to be scanning those into our software, updating them, making sure that they're legible from old copies. So it's always a good idea to know where those documents are and have them handy for when that time comes. Check your credit score and know what it is. So we have on the screen a free resource, annualcreditreport.com. You can do that every year for free. It'll tell you what your credit is. It is always a good idea to look at it and make sure it's actually you. We do see sometimes where there is incorrect information on there. So if it's pulling up on your credit report, make sure you know whether it's yours or not. And then two, also look at your credit from the standpoint of a landlord. What we see most often is landlords looking at things that are going to impact whether they want to consider you as a renter. That would be old utility bills and previous debts to landlords. Those are what we see most commonly be flagged for people trying to get out on the open market with a voucher. So take a look at that. Is there anything that is on your score that you forgot about that's been hanging out there for a while that you need to clean up? Just keep that in mind. We don't typically see landlords looking at things that don't impact renting, like medical bills, car loans, things like that. But especially for utility bills and previous landlords, they're going to want to see what has your credit history been in the past before they decide whether they would want to rent to you. Now, if you're sticking with RHA as your landlord, you've already been through that process. You wouldn't have to be too concerned about it, but that is very common for Section 8 landlords to check. Next slide. Clean out old clutter or dispose of things you no longer want to keep. Do some spring cleaning. I'm not trying to tell anybody that you can't keep what you want to keep. Please keep something if you want to. But if you're like me and you have an old junk drawer or a whole junk closet that I have just stacked things in and I close the door and I try not to look at it until I have to think about it the next year, take some time to go through that, see if there's anything you want to donate, trash, get rid of. The less that you have to move, the less you have to box up, the less you have to run from a car to a new location. It just makes the process easier if you aren't trying to both declutter and move at the same time. Set aside some savings to supplement any kind of relocation or moving payments. So as a federal agency, the Housing Authority, we do issue relocation payments, but we have strict guidelines that are regulated by law as to what we can pay for. So there may be some things that you want to pay for during this process that the Housing Authority just legally we cannot assist with. So it is always a good idea to have some sort of cushion just in case you run across one of those items. We certainly are going to help you cover costs for things that are reasonable relocation payments. But if there is something outside of the box, it's always a good idea just to have a little cushion, because at that point, the Housing Authority would have to look and see if that's an eligible expense or not from the regulation standpoint. Continue to call us for any maintenance issues, bugs, roaches, pests, leaks, anything like that. We are still operating Stonecrest as a functional public housing property, so we still need you to tell us when stuff is not quite right, when we need to get one of our guys out there to look at it. If we don't know about it, we can't fix it. So please make sure you're continuing to call all of those things in so that we can make sure that your household is continuing to function until the time where we get to relocation. Make sure you're on the lookout for future correspondence. Again, I'd rather you get on your nerves and you tell Laura to be quiet and stop sending you emails than for you to not know what's going on, right? So again, emails, flyers, phone calls, all of those things, newsletters. things posted on your mailboxes or on the community room door. Make sure you're on the lookout for any kind of notifications. We are going to be having more resident meetings, and we love having our residents come out. So please make sure you keep an eye out for that. Next slide. So some key takeaways, just the main real bullet points to remember is that we're working with all of our residents right now to get through this process. We're very early on. We don't have any firm plans, but we know that we will get there hopefully in the next year to make those plans and start rolling them out to you. Everybody is going to continue to have affordable housing. Nobody is going to be without housing assistance or at risk of homelessness because of this process. Every resident does have the right to be in affordable housing. That will not change just because of plans of redevelopment or renovations. Next slide. And we are happy to take questions as well. A few other things that are coming to my mind to mention. We are applying for this process for all RHA public housing properties. And every property is slightly different. So you may hear something from somebody who lives at a different community, whether that's Mayview or Glenwood Towers or Walnut Terrace.